we are going to take a look at how we could create this file and create the cutting speed and get the job done just a little bit faster. So this did come from a Facebook group where a member was wondering how they could speed the cutting time up, or how can we break up a three-dimensional model into sections to where we don't have to have the machine running the full time specified. So originally he was thinking that this file was going to take close to 60 hours to cut, which is a very long time. And to have a machine running, constantly nonstop for 60 hours is, a challenge. I mean, you just got to worry about, power outages or, bit breaking and anything like that. So it's always good to try to break it up into smaller sections and kind of cut a little bit at a time. So we're going to take a look at how to do that. Just quickly playing around, I think the initial 60 hours, just by tweaking a couple things and combining three-dimensional toolpaths with two-dimensional and combining the both, it quickly got the 60-hour time down to like 14 hours. And with a little bit more tweaking, I believe we could probably get the project done in a day. So this is what we're going to focus on. It shouldn't take us too long today. I know we usually go for about an hour or so. We may not be a full hour today, which it's always a guess go into these things, just not knowing exactly what we're going to be talking about or how we're going to do it. So we are working entirely within VCarve Pro. One thing that I initially did to really help speed it up a little bit is when the model was first brought in, it was brought in with some, it was thick. I changed the cutting plane, and I'm sorry I don't have the original model anymore to show, but I did import this to only include the area of what is going to be the three-dimensional cut. I also tweaked the height or the scale of the overall model down a little bit. We still have some pretty hefty, thickness and depth here. I reduced that just a little bit to help with not having to necessarily do a roughing and patterning, creating the pattern that way. So again, this is VCarve Pro running version 10. Going to the 2D view, we can see the grayscale. The toolpaths that we have in here, I've got a roughing and a finishing, and let's take a look at the 3D view to see what that looks like. It's just a lot of blue. So we're going to do a quick preview so we can see what the previewed toolpaths look like. All right, so some of the challenges that we have is picking up the detail. So a lot of the eagle and even around some of the letters and some of the rope molding around the outside have some, pretty intricate detail that would require a small bit, small ball nose to be able to pick up that detail. But at the same time, there is a lot of flat surface that does not need to have that small of a bit to produce the detail. I mean, all of this area here is all flat and at one level. The same for all of the border here. This is all sitting at one level. To point out what level that is, if you hover your mouse over top of the flat sections of the model, looking down at the bottom here of the screen, it gives you the X, Y, and the height of the Z. So we can see as you're moving the mouse around on this flat area, that Z value is not changing. Hovering down into this area here, we can see it has a different Z value than what we had here, but all of this area is still a flat area. So we don't necessarily need to run our 3D, 16th inch ball nose all over this area here. why not use a larger, 1/4-inch end mill to be able to cut all of this out? And even though this is a 3-dimensional model that has the text protruding, well, let's draw some, text around it, or create the vectors and just do a profile cut around those letters. So again, this is what we're going to focus on, and we're going to see how it goes. If you don't know my style yet, it is kind of just, let's dig in and see what happens. So this is going to be a little bit on the fly, although I did do some, playing around and figuring things out here. So the first step that I did in creating this project to test it out was just wanted to see what kind of detail a bit is going to pick up. So the first thing, again, without any of these toolpaths here, so I'm just going to right click and go ahead and delete all of the visible toolpaths. As all visible, there is none visible. So delete all. So this is kind of almost where I started. I do have some text vectors that I drew around it, so I'm going to leave that there, but just know that this text, these vectors were not part of the 3-dimensional model. I did add that after the fact. So the first step, again, was brought it in and created the size model. I set the job size up to be the same size as what we needed the model to be. That is how you're going to pick up the most detail. So we are 24X, 24Y, and 1.5 inches thick. So this is a fairly large 3-dimensional model, and very easily understand why it could take so long to carve this out. So even though we may need to do a roughing pass, I'm only focusing right now to try to determine what diameter bit is going to be best used to pick up the detail. And I am just going to go to the model boundary, just cut it all out, see if we get lucky on the time. It's a large area for a 16th inch ball nose. I'm going to go with a 1/8 inch ball nose. I'm going to go ahead and select that and come down and select calculate. All right, so now that it's calculated, we're onto the 3-dimensional toolpath preview. With that visible, I'm going to select to preview the toolpath. So it looks okay. It looks like an 1/8 inch cutter is pretty much going to do it for us with that step over. Not too terribly bad. Now I am going to use this timing function here to kind of estimate the time that it's going to take. So 31 hours, that is a long time for this. We might not be exactly right because of this, there's a whole nother thing, Excel deceleration times and the scale factor and everything else that we have to look at to get an accurate time. But I am really just using this as a guideline to see if what we do is going to reduce the overall cutting time. So I'm just going to make note or remember that it is like, 31 hours, 30 hours for this, and close here. Now I'm going to go in and start, tweaking things just a little bit. Again, like I said, we did not need to have any of the 1/8 inch cutter to go around any of this flat area. So I'm going to use the tracing function. Even though this is a 3-dimensional model, we can trace this to fit vectors to a bitmap. The bitmap is our grayscale of this model. So going and selecting that and using the tracing function here, if you hover over top of or move this around, you can see what is going to get selected and what is not going to get traced. So I'm setting it right there, and that looks like that is pretty much going to trace around the gray section. So we'll get some lines, vectors around the eagle and the shield. Also another line around the outside here and some bits up here that we'll end up deleting and removing. So scrolling down to the bottom and clicking preview. And I'm going to select apply at this point. So now that has given us this vector right here that is all of these vectors that are grouped together. We need to remove some and kind of separate that a little bit. So I'm just going to ungroup that by typing the letter U to ungroup and look at what we do not need. Or maybe I just might leave it there because later, no, there's lots of little things here that we don't need. And I do know this is drawn as a perfect circle. So we really don't need the outer circle and have the automatic tracing draw that for us, because even though it sees it, even though we see it as a circle, it does not see this as a perfect circle. As you know, you zoom in on the image, we see it's kind of jaggedy there. So we will end up drawing a circle that is replacing all of these vectors that I'm now deleting with a cleaner, more perfect circle. And it's always good to come in and clean it up. Don't leave it for later. I'll come back and clean those vectors up later, even though right now the task that we're looking at is not for this sets of vectors. I am coming in and deleting them and cleaning it up now because later I'm not going to want to, and it's just going to become noise and a little bit of an aggravation. Also, we've got some double text around here that I'm cleaning up. And so I would go through and clean that up, even though I just said do it now. I'm not going to take your time as you watch how I'm cleaning all this up. And I'll come back and do that later. But again, that's not what I would normally do if this was a job that I wasn't doing a video for. All of the area in between here, I don't need to know, deleted. Pay attention when you're deleting and using that, because I accidentally grabbed this outer border in the sweep select and deleted that border as well, the item that we need. So we are going to use this outline. The whole purpose of what I'm doing right now is getting this tracing, is to be able to get an outline of the model to help contain the three-dimensional toolpath. Also have this item here, just going to look, that is not 100% clean circle. So I want to create that as a clean circle, so deleting that. And we'll later come back and create a circle for that. So let's just double click this finishing toolpath. And right now it is set to be the model boundary. I'm going to change that to do as a selected vectors, selecting the eagle, and do have a boundary offset here. And I'll explain what that is after we calculate it. And just making sure 1/8 inch cutter is there and selecting calculate. So now, rather than having that 1/8 inch cutter come around to do everything, it is only doing the eagle. And just going to quickly see what we have here for time. So now we're down to 7 hours. Yes, we still have a lot more here to do, but just a lot of that 3D took some time off. The next thing I want to do is create a three-dimensional or a two-dimensional circle. And I'm going to snap that and have that snap to the center of the job. And just drag out a circle. Might not have snapped to the center, but that is all right. We have a centering function here under align vectors. With that circle selected, clicking that button right there, we are good. So now I know that this is in the center of the job, and I'm going to stretch that out. When you stretch, notice that the center is not staying consistent as I stretch it. I'm going to undo, and to keep the center centered, holding the shift key down as you drag that up is going to scale that proportionally out from the center of rotation. So bring that in just a little bit more to where we're right there. At that point, a couple things that we need to learn is, one, at what depth are these letters sitting? And we can hover their mouse over top of there, that the thickness is 0.32. That is the total thickness of the material that is left. So that is not our total cutting depth. We want to leave 0.32 material, as if we also scan and model and hover over the flat section here, we have 0.04. That is how much we need to leave on the model. So I'm going to see how it is here, and I'll probably end up having to step back and recalculate some things, because I'm thinking I probably won't get it right the first time. But that's why we have the preview to help make the mistake before we get to the machine. So at this point, I'm going to select that circle we just created and the eagle border. I'm going to create a pocketing toolpath, just a two-dimensional toolpath. The total depth that want this to be made is, our total material thickness was 0.5, and we need to leave that 0.32.
Now we're going to go ahead and, once everything is up and running, do you have to push the reset button when you power on?
Like I said, I should be smarter than this, and I know it's not right.
Perfect. So that one's easy. So yeah, powered on, plugged in.
Yeah. So the cut, that's going to be the total cutting depth. See if this is right in the preview. And again, that's what it is. I'm not going to now select a 1/4 inch end mill to see if that may or may not be enough to get into there. But you really always want to start out with the larger bit, because this is going to get the job done faster. The larger bit on a pocketing toolpath is also going to be a smoother, flat area. So going with a 1/4 inch, selecting the toolpaths in the step down that I have, just want to verify that. I'm going to be able to go a little bit deeper than that 1/8 inch per pass. The rule of thumb is no more than 1 1/2 times. So, 5/16. Is that math right? 3/8. I'm going to go 3/8 per pass. And by clicking edit and not selecting, I only made the change to that pass depth for this particular toolpath. And I didn't make any permanent changes to my tool database. Just clicked edit there for a total of 4 passes. Clicking calculate is giving us a total pocket only around the outside of that eagle. And it is looking like we are getting enough detail around everything to not need to go any deeper with it. Select what the preview of this now looks like. Reset the preview. I'm going to preview only the finishing toolpath, and so we could see this in steps. Clicking to preview the visible toolpath. That is the eagle only, and now selecting the pocket and preview that as a finished toolpath. So notice that we are up higher than the model finish. That's okay. That's what we want it to be, because we also have to remove a lot of this material again. Only the next step is to also have the text selected. So coming into the 3D view, with those objects still selected, I'm now also going to select the text. Sorry.
Perfect, then we'll check that box.
All right, so again, this is the reason why it would have been good to come in and clean up those vectors. And I didn't take the time, this is still the automatic tracing that we're seeing here for a job for real that you're gonna cut. It would probably be best just to find that font and retype that font and apply that curve there and use the font as the selecting vectors. So again, I'm going to use a pocketing toolpath. We are already cutting to a depth of, I wish I would remember, 0.5 minus 0.32. So we're already taking 1.18 material off. It has already been removed. So I'm going to move that up into the start depth. That is where we're going to start. And I want to remove another from 3.2 to 1, so 1.2.
You're on profile.
12. Oh, thank you. That was a test just to see if people are really watching me. He passed. I think that was Scott that spoke up. So thank you, Scott. So again, pocketing, and now we want to go from a 0.32 down to a depth of, I'm just going to say 1.2, and that is going to be, 0.2. So with that being said, also this time I don't think that 1/4 inch cutter is going to fit through here, but that is okay. We might come back and use this function right here. We're going to not use that right now because we want to see if that bigger cutter is going to function. Pocket to toast. And now with that one visible, going to go ahead and preview the visible toolpath. Yeah, so I thought I did something. So I did do that when I was still in the profile. I did not put the start depth in here. So I'm going to double click here and put the start depth at 1.18 because that is what we have already removed, and we need to go down another 0.2 from that location or from that height. So now we can see that that toolpath has been sunk down in there. Selecting preview the visible toolpath, and there is the text that we could see, and sure enough, just as I suspected, that the 1/8 inch or the 1/4 inch cutter was not able to get into the areas that it needed to. Now we have a couple options that we could do here, and we'll explore both of them. One is within that pocketing toolpath, we have the option to select a smaller cutter or a larger cutter to get the areas that it couldn't fit. The other option that we have is just create a profile toolpath around the text only with a small enough cutter, because it's looking to me like the only area that we really need to make a modification to the detail of it. So we'll try both methods to see what happens. So double clicking this toolpath to bring up the toolpath that has the text selected. Going to use a larger area clearance tool. So it is strange that I always get this backwards, but I think what this is saying here is use the larger area clearance tool. So I believe it is wanting us to select the larger tool for here and the smaller tool for the primary. We can always come back and undo that if I'm misunderstanding what that is. So we'll do the 1/4 inch cutter there, and for the end mill, going to select an 1/8 inch end mill. And now what that has done is given us two toolpaths here. So the clearance tool is what is using the 1/4" cutter, and the other one is the 1/8". We
Yeah,
can
you'll have to put the yellow keypad again.
make that visible by just unchecking that. And we can see I selected it correctly the first time, which is surprising. So that's 1/4" cutter for the bigger portion, and then the 1/8" cutter. So let's just uncheck that. And we see that that 1/8" cutter also did go around the eagle itself and the text. So this is where we have to ask ourselves, is going around the eagle adding enough of a resolution or picking up enough detail to make it worth our time to run an 1/8" cutter around the outside of it? Because that extra time around this eagle here is, it's machine time. It's a little extra time for that. So we are going to just select both of those and do a preview all visible toolpaths. And I can definitely see that the text changed. That is looking better, but I saw no change to really any of the detail of the eagle. It appears to be the same. So to me, I don't think it's a time saver or is worth wasting the time to go around the eagle here because it's really not picking up any detail. Even though, yes, it is just a profile around there, it's probably, 4 minutes added to that process that we just don't want. So coming into here, what we're going to do is go back into that pocketing toolpath, and I'm going to uncheck use the larger clearance tool, go back to the original 1/8" cutter, or the original 1/4" cutter, going to select that, calculate, and I will reset the preview just to kind of get a fresh start. And this time we'll just preview all of these toolpaths, and being back to the part where that pocketing toolpath just didn't get all the lettering out. And at this point, we'll just do a profiling toolpath around the letters only. So unselecting the two other objects and only having the text selected or the vectors for the text selected. Going to use the profile toolpath. I'm going to cut on the outside. Again, we started out with the depth of 1.8, going 0.2 from that location. There is the 1/8" cutter. And now, since it did remove the majority of this, I'm going to say that this 1/8" cutter is going to be strong enough to remove that 0.2 material as long as I run the pocketing first, because we are only going to be trimming away. Yes, we are going to have some harder areas for it to get into, but I think we're going to be okay with that. So setting that to 1 pass, cutting on the outside. Calculate that. So that is giving us the toolpath that is just going around the outside of the letters. And let's do a preview visible toolpaths. So it is looking okay. Just curious on what is going on with our total time. See if we're reducing anything or what we're gaining. So right now, we're still at a total of 9 hours. Remember, we started with that 3D toolpath. We started out with 30 hours. So the next step is doing this area up here. And again, that's just a 2-dimensional pocketing that we're going to run with there. And to create that, I don't want it to go, I could, and you might think that you could just use this same vector right here to create the same pocketing here. I don't want to do that because what will happen is we'll get little feathery parts of wood here because, perfect world, it will cut it because this side is already moved. But we're going to have a little bit of bit deflection, probably a little bit of movement in the wood, and just the overall tolerance buildup isn't going to allow us to use this same vector to cut on the outside of this one. So I'm going to select that vector and do a Control-C, which I just copied it to the clipboard, and Control-V. That paste it right back in directly on top of the other vector. And to scale this, I'm going to use the Transform Vectors Scale tool, and I'm just going to decrease this by, let's go down to 15.9, with the anchor point being in the center, so it's going to scale proportionally to the center. And apply, then close. So now we can see we have that vector set inward just a little bit. Also do a Control-C and a Control-V to be able to stretch this out to get the outside of that. Oh, you know what I did? I did not hold the Shift key down. Holding the Shift key down as I scale that bigger. That is out here. Now we can hover our mouse over top of here and we can see the Z is going, the move functions. It's not, let me just scale this out a little bit bigger and then I'll show you what I'm pointing out. All right. So hovering the mouse over top of here, we can see that Z right about this area here is where it starts, falling off the edge. That is this, detail here. So I did get that circle to be a little bit bigger to fall out. That we will then create another version copy of this circle, a little bit smaller from around in this area to the outer area to be able to create the rope around the outside of this. But for right now, we are creating the flat area that we want here. And we first need to see what depth that is, and that is at 1406 or 4206. Write that number down because my memory is terrible. And we need to subtract that from our overall material thickness to know what our cutting depth needs to be. So selecting 1 and 2, and also selecting that text. Actually, let's do it this way. I lied. So the text is sitting at 0.71. We'll just verify this on the model, see what this is looking like. Yeah, so the eagle is quite a bit up higher. So the text is at 0.71 and we are at 0.426. So at this point, I'm going to go 714. Going to have those vectors selected, going to a pocketing toolpath. Start depth is going to be starting at the surface because we haven't removed any of this material yet. And I'm going down a total thickness of 0.5 minus our 0.714 and hit the equal sign. So we're going down a total of 0.78. And again, I'm going to edit the number of passes to make that 0.375. I like the offset rather than the rastering, so it should be getting some nice clean concentric circles. Cutting us into lumber, so climb, calculate. Preview the visible toolpaths. That is another area of flat clearance that we have. Coming back to the model here, selecting the text this time, going to a pocketing toolpath. And this time, I do know that just from experience of what we did here, that the 1/4 inch cutter is not going to get all of this. And in this instance, I don't have anything, or we don't have anything that is, that we would not want that 1/8 inch cutter to go around. So just going to build that in automatically this time. So selecting the smaller tool, which is the 1/8 inch, and going down, changing the number of passes to be 1/4 inch per pass. Yeah, I'm going to have to come back to that because unfortunately when we change the cutting depth, that is going to change. So again, setting the cut depth to the start depth to what we have already removed. And we need to cut down a total of 1.5 minus our 0.4206. And also subtracting what we have already removed of that minus 0.786. So we're cutting down another little bit more than 1/4 inch. The larger area clearance tool is that same 1/4 inch cutter, and a certain we could do in a single pass. So making that any bigger. Also, I'm going to set this also to 1 pass because I'm pretty certain it's going to do just fine. That one done, we will preview the visible toolpaths. And there is another layer, and it's looking like we really need to go in with yet another smaller bit because that 1/8 inch bit was not enough to completely get around everything. If that E is the only area that is an issue, I would probably come in and modify the vectors slightly to make and allow room for that 1/8 inch bit to come into it. So an example, I'm just going to draw out a circle here, and I'm going to set that circle diameter to be the diameter of the bit, which is 1/8 inch. I'm using this circle to be able to move around to see how much I would need to modify the vectors for this to fit. So I won't go through and do all of it. It's grouped together, so I'm not going to do that just yet because we already have toolpaths associated with it. But anyway, what I would do is go into node editing, modify and relocate these vectors down a little bit to this area. So then I know that that 1/8 inch cutter will be able to go in there and fit. So it'll take, you know, a little less time if a small modification like that isn't going to really affect the overall appearance of the product. Why not change it just a little bit to allow for that larger bit to fit? So the final thing that we have to do for this is the 3-dimension toolpath that we need for the outside. So as I said, we were going to make a duplicate copy of the vector circle. So do a Control-C, Control-V. Do not hold the Shift key down. Control-Z, wonderful keystrokes there. Holding the Shift key down and scale in just a little bit. Control-C and a Control-V again. And holding the Shift key down and scaling that to the outside of our vector here. We will now use these 2 vectors here to create a 3 dimensional toolpath around the outside. So with those selected, using the finishing toolpath, I'm going to go with the 1/8 inch ball nose around the selected vectors. I'm going to choose the offset toolpath this time, which is going to give us a more efficient round offsetted toolpath around the outside of the border. So coming down and clicking calculate is now only giving us a 3-dimensional toolpath between those two selected vectors. Let's go ahead and preview what that is going to look like. And so that is really about it. So this is the finished product of what we see now is real close to the same as what we saw when we just selected the whole model and did a 1/8 inch 3-dimensional toolpath across and over top of the entire model. So what is our total time now? We're down to 18 hours for this. So that is much better than the 30 hours that it would take if we were to just run a full 3-dimensional toolpath over top of the entire object. There is one thing that we didn't do. We did do any roughing. 1/8 inch cutter probably would need to do some roughing in this model. The depth that we have here, if it shot straight down and did that, we probably would break that bit. Now, there's a couple ways of thinking about the order of operations, of what order we do things in. So when 3D toolpathing and cutting, the best chance of breaking a bit is on the first pass of the toolpath. That is, say it's coming here just under its beak. If that is the first pass, it's going to go straight down to full depth and cut across here. The next pass that it makes is just stepping over 10% of that bit and working its way back over. So the chances of breaking that bit on the second pass is not that great. So one thing we could do to maybe not do a roughing pass is not cut this first. So let's just preview this in segments again. So I'm going to reset the toolpath here. So clicking reset toolpaths. And let's say we cut this pocketing out first. With that selected and visible, preview the visible toolpath. So now what that has done is created pretty much a roughing pass to make the center or the 1/8 inch cutter, all of the deep passes are really going to be on the outside and work its way in. So it is going to be a little less likely that we wouldn't want to or need to cut use a roughing pass. So yeah, so somebody's got the question here for V-carving and area clearance. Yeah, absolutely. Same type of process applies when you're V-carving and cutting at different depths here. So this is working with a 3D model, but you have that ability and function within the V-carving as well, and kind of the same rules apply. So now with that done, let's just put a checkbox here and take a look at how this toolpath is going to cut. And I'm going to inspect this just a little bit by rotating it around, and we could see that the first pass is this red line coming over and plunging down right here. We've already pocketed all of this area out, so it's just going to come down up and over this area of the feather or the arrows. And I'm not seeing anything else, really anything in this model that is going to really require us to do a 3D roughing toolpath for it. It looks like we are going to be safe because all of the deep cuts or the deep starting cuts are in the area that we've already removed the pocketing from. So I am going to take the gamble that I do not need to do a 3D roughing toolpath there. I will quickly find out, and it may be a $60 error as I break that bit, but that also is going to save quite a bit of time. And yeah, I'm feeling fairly confident that I would not need to do a roughing toolpath on that. If we did want to do a roughing toolpath, we could just select the vector here and do a roughing toolpath. And I would go with, you could use an end mill for roughing. There's no reason why not. Let's go to the vector selection and just do a calculate here. I'm going to say okay with that. So let's do a reset to see what the roughing toolpath looks like. That's selected, preview, reset, and preview the roughing toolpath. Try that again. Reset. Only having the roughing visible and do a preview visible toolpath. So this is take a look at the time that may have added to it. So, estimated time that's added 2 hours to the overall cutting time. Again, I don't think we need it, but even at that, we could increase if you feel like you do. That is definitely quite a bit of roughing that was put in there. We could increase the step over. We're already a fairly large step over. The pass depth, there's 1/8 inch. We already determined that 3/8 is going to be good. So we're down to an hour and a half. I'm going to, it's kind of a judgment call on your part to see and a little bit in your experience what kind of wood and such. But again, if it were me, I would not be running that roughing pass. So at that point, I will just delete. This. And we have all of the tool paths set here. The way they work, if you have an automatic tool changer or if you do save these files out, you can save them all out in one file. I would not recommend that in a large file like this. Break it up, and this is a way to kind of section it up. You could do some of the cutting today and then come back the next day and pick up the tool paths again. So I kind of separate them in functions of what they do. So I might set up these tool paths the inside. You could save those out as one cutting file. Save these two out in one cutting file. And at this point, it's kind of up to you to organize how you might want to do it. I like to do them by bit selection. So what I would probably choose to do is cut the inside here. That's the 1/4 inch cutter. We also have this is why, not leaving tool paths as default names and be a little bit more selective with it. This is also a 1/4 inch cutter. That is the second depth. This inside text was the 1/8 inch cutter, so I'm not going to have that selected. There is a 1/4 inch selection and another 1/4 inch selection. So those are all the bits that are using a 1/4 inch bit. This is the 1/8 inch bit, so I would save all of those out as one tool path and preview what those are. And just to help organize a little bit, I'm going to select that and move that down into the list so we can see grouping them by name. So feeling I thought I selected one in there. So we now see we have our 1/8 inch cutter here and another 1/8 inch cutter. So again, let's preview this in the order that I would cut these out. So that is all of the 1/4 inch cutters. preview all those as a visible toolpath. It's looking good. Saving out the 2 files here that are the 1/8" cutter. We preview those. That leaves the 2 3-dimensional finishing toolpaths, so just moving that down into the list. And I would save these out, even though they are running the exact same bit, just for time purposes and you know, chances of taking a break and rerunning the file. I'm going to set these out separately, so I would save this file as one, run that file, and then run the other file. I reset them all, but anyway, there we go. Preview all of it, and again, we have a just quickly by thinking about strategy and using vectors to contain 3D objects, and even though the whole product is a 3D object, doesn't mean that we have to toolpath it as a 3D object. So we can see just by doing what we did. We've saved, almost cut the time in half. And if we go in and tweak some of the feed rates, we could probably knock another couple hours of time off of the overall time, just by, you know, modifying, you know, the rapid speeds a little bit, increase that, or cutting feed rates. I saw in some cases were, you know, a little bit lower than what I might cut for real. So there's, you know, 2 inches a second. We could really cut that at probably at 4, even on a desktop, cutting these up at 4 inches a second. Well, we are going to be closing up here, or I am, for the day. Feel free to email me any questions that you have. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week. You have a good day.